He thought the wife he left penniless was finished, but the wife he left penniless was secretly a real estate mogul worth $800 million. And while he ran to marry her college rival, her ultimate payback was already in motion to ruin their lives. Daniel Whitmore walked out of that courthouse believing he had erased Emily Harper from his future. He had stripped her of joint accounts, signed her out of investments, and left her standing with one suitcase and no access to the lifestyle she once shared with him. To the world, she looked abandoned, penniless, replaced. But what Daniel didn't know, what her college rival Victoria Lane certainly didn't know, was that the quiet wife he left penniless wasn't dependent. She wasn't fragile, she wasn't broke, she was an $800 million real estate mogul. And she had been one long before he decided to run into the arms of her college rival. Victoria had always wanted Daniel. In college, she competed for him openly, loudly, ruthlessly. And when Daniel finally ran to marry her after leaving his wife penniless, it felt like victory. The rival had won. The wife had lost. The story seemed simple, but simple stories are the most dangerous ones. Because while Daniel celebrated his new marriage to Emily's college rival, while headlines praised his expanding real estate venture, while Victoria flaunted the ring that once belonged to someone else, documents were being signed behind closed doors, land titles were being transferred, majority shares were quietly consolidating, and every signature carried the same name. Harper, the same wife he left penniless, the same woman he underestimated. The same real estate mogul worth $800 million. But here's the question that changes everything. Why did Emily allow herself to look penniless if she was secretly worth $800 million? Why did she stay silent while he ran to marry her college rival? And what kind of ultimate payback ruins lives without ever raising its voice? Because this wasn't revenge born from anger. This was payback engineered with patience. And by the time Daniel and his new bride realized who Emily truly was, the ground beneath their marriage and their fortune was already gone. So the real question is not whether her ultimate payback ruined their lives. The real question is, how long had she been planning it? Daniel Whitmore believed the silence meant defeat. The courthouse doors closed behind him with a dull metallic sound that echoed through the empty hallway. But to Daniel, it sounded like the final note of victory. He adjusted his tie, smoothed the sleeve of his tailored navy suit, and stepped down the courthouse stairs like a man who had just secured the rest of his life. Behind him, Emily Harper walked slowly, holding a single suitcase. Just one. No tears, no shouting, no begging. That alone unsettled him. Daniel had expected resistance. During the entire divorce process, his lawyers had warned him Emily might fight back for assets, demand alimony, or try to claim part of his company. But she hadn't done any of those things. She signed everything, quietly. The judge had even paused once during the hearing and asked, "Mrs. Whitmore, do you understand the settlement terms you are agreeing to?" Emily had simply nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." Her voice had been calm, too calm. Daniel stopped beside his black sedan and turned halfway toward her as she stepped out of the courthouse doors. "Take care of yourself, Emily," he said casually, almost politely. Emily looked at him, not with anger, not with sadness, but with a long, thoughtful gaze, like someone studying a moment she would remember later. "Of course," she replied. Her fingers tightened slightly around the handle of the suitcase. Then she walked past him. Daniel frowned faintly, but he brushed the feeling away. To him, that silence meant surrender. Across the parking lot, Victoria Lane leaned against a sleek white convertible, sunglasses perched on her head. She had arrived deliberately early, making sure she would be visible the moment Daniel stepped outside. When he reached her, she wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him without hesitation. "You're finally free," she whispered. Daniel smiled. "Finally?" Emily saw the kiss as she crossed the street. Her footsteps slowed for just a moment. Not because she was hurt, because she was remembering something. Years earlier, in a large office filled with blueprints and framed photographs of city skylines, her father had once told her something that had sounded strange at the time. "Power is quiet, Emily," Robert Harper had said while sliding a stack of property maps across the table. "The loud people chase it. The smart people control it." She had been 19 then, sitting beside him during a zoning meeting, listening to developers argue over land values. Her father had built Harper Urban Developments from almost nothing: abandoned warehouses, condemned properties, forgotten districts. And he had taught her every part of it. How land appreciates, how debt can control empires, how patience wins wars. When he died during her sophomore year of college, the lawyers had gathered her in the same office and explained the structure of his estate. Not inheritance, control. 51% of Harper Urban Developments had been transferred into a protected trust under her name. But there was a condition. Her ownership would remain confidential. Even her future husband would not automatically know. Her father had insisted on that clause. "People behave differently when they think you need them," he had told her once. Emily understood the truth of those words now more than ever. Daniel's car door slammed shut, pulling her back to the present. The engine roared to life as he drove away, with Victoria laughing beside him. Emily watched the car disappear down the street. Then she opened her suitcase. Inside were not clothes. Inside were folders, legal documents, property reports, and a small leather notebook containing development plans worth hundreds of millions of dollars. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number saved simply as bored. The call connected quickly. "Yes, Ms. Harper," a calm voice answered. Emily looked up at the skyline rising across the city. Towers, cranes, half-finished luxury apartments. Buildings her father had once studied carefully. Buildings she now understood better than anyone else. "It's done," she said quietly. "Understood. Shall we proceed with the acquisition schedule?" Emily paused for only a moment. Across town, Daniel Whitmore was celebrating his freedom. Across the city, investors were preparing to launch his new real estate venture, Whitmore Living, a luxury residential project that would dominate the downtown skyline. A project built on land he believed he owned. Emily closed the suitcase. "Yes," she replied softly. "Proceed." Somewhere inside Harper Urban Developments, 3 acquisition triggers were activated. Daniel Whitmore had just built his dream on land that belonged to his ex-wife. He just didn't know it yet. Daniel Whitmore had never felt more powerful than he did 2 months after the divorce. Freedom looked good on him. The city skyline shimmered through the floor-to-ceiling glass of the rooftop restaurant where he stood holding a crystal glass of champagne. Investors, bankers, and developers filled the room with laughter and ambition. But tonight was the official celebration of Whitmore Living, the luxury residential company Daniel had dreamed about for years. "This city needs vision," Daniel said confidently as several investors leaned closer. "And Whitmore Living is going to reshape the skyline." A ripple of approving nods followed. Victoria Lane stood beside him in a shimmering black dress, her hand resting possessively on his arm. She loved these moments. Cameras flashed occasionally from journalists invited to document the new real estate star rising in the city. "Daniel Whitmore," she whispered with a smile, "the man who turned his life around in 60 days. Daniel chuckled. "More like the man who removed unnecessary weight." Victoria smirked. Both of them knew exactly who he meant. Across the room, Daniel's chief financial partner, Leonard Hayes. He'd raised a glass. "To Whitmore Living!" Everyone echoed the toast, but as Daniel lifted his glass, his phone buzzed inside his jacket pocket. He ignored it. The night was too important. Victoria leaned close to him. "You know what everyone's saying, right?" "What?" That divorcing Emily was the smartest business decision you ever made. Daniel smiled. Some people just slow you down. But somewhere beneath the music and laughter, an old memory stirred quietly in the back of his mind. Years earlier, during a dinner when they were still married, Emily had once looked out over the same skyline and said something strange. "Cities don't belong to the loudest developers," she had murmured while tracing the outline of buildings with her eyes. "They belong to whoever controls the land underneath." Daniel had laughed then. "You sound like a zoning attorney?" Emily had smiled faintly, but said nothing more. Back in the present, Daniel's phone buzzed again, then again, 3 times in a row. He frowned slightly and finally pulled it out. Unknown legal number. He dismissed the call. Victoria noticed the change in his expression. "Problem?" she asked. "Probably a contract question from the lawyers." She shrugged. "Ignore it tonight." Daniel slid the phone back into his pocket. But across the city, inside a quiet conference room 23 floors above downtown, Emily Harper sat at the head of a long glass table. 5 board members of Harper Urban Developments were present, along with 2 corporate attorneys and a financial strategist. Stacks of documents lay neatly arranged before them. No champagne, no celebration, only precision. On a large digital screen displayed maps of the city. Highlighted in blue were several blocks of land in the downtown district, the same land Whitmore Living intended to develop. A gray-haired board member adjusted his glasses. "Ms. Harper, the acquisition sequence is ready. Once we activate the final trigger, Harper Urban Developments will regain controlling interest in the entire district." Emily studied the map quietly. Every parcel had once belonged to her father. Some had been sold strategically years ago to create development opportunities. Others had been leased through layered holding companies. What Daniel never understood was that land ownership rarely disappeared. It simply changed structures. Emily remembered standing beside her father in this same room years earlier. She had been barely 20 then, listening as he explained the philosophy behind their empire. "People think buildings are wealth," Robert Harper had told her while pointing to a city map. "But buildings come and go. Land stays." He had tapped a finger on the downtown district. "This area will become the heart of the city one day." Emily had asked quietly, "How do you make sure you still control it?" Her father smiled. "You don't control it all the time. You just make sure you control it when it matters." Back in the present, Emily looked at the attorneys. "Status of Whitmore Living's financing?" One of the lawyers opened a file. "Mr. Whitmore secured investment through 3 venture funds. However, their development rights depend entirely on the land lease agreement signed through Crescent Holdings." Emily nodded slightly. Crescent Holdings? A company Daniel believed belonged to a group of private investors. But Crescent Holdings had always been a Harper subsidiary. Daniel simply never noticed. A younger board member leaned forward. "Once the lease is revoked, Whitmore Living's project collapses." Emily closed the folder slowly. "Not yet." The room fell silent. The lawyer looked confused. "Ms. Harper?" Emily's voice remained calm. "Let them continue construction preparations." "But that increases their financial exposure," he said carefully. "Yes," Emily replied. Silence settled again, because everyone in that room understood exactly what that meant. Across town, Daniel Whitmore laughed as another investor congratulated him. "You're going to dominate downtown," the man said. "No one else has the land for projects that size." Daniel raised his glass again. "That's why timing matters." At that exact moment, the legal team inside Harper Urban Developments began transferring controlling shares across 3 holding companies. Quietly, efficiently, invisible to the outside world. Emily stood and walked to the window. The skyline glittered below her. Somewhere among those buildings, Daniel believed he was building his empire. She watched the district where his luxury towers were supposed to rise. Her voice broke the silence behind her. Activate Phase 1. A board member pressed a key on the table console. Contracts were executed. Ownership structures shifted. 3 financial triggers activated simultaneously. Daniel Whitmore's project had just become dependent on land controlled entirely by Harper Urban Developments, and Daniel still believed the night belonged to him. But the first crack in his empire had already begun. Daniel Whitmore woke the next morning still smiling from the success of the previous night. The celebration of Whitmore Living had gone exactly how he imagined. Investors were excited, reporters had taken photographs, and Victoria had spent half the evening posting pictures of them together with captions about new beginnings. For the first time in months, Daniel felt completely in control of his future. He stood in the penthouse kitchen pouring coffee when Victoria walked in wearing his white shirt. "You're trending," she said, holding up her phone. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Good trending or scandal trending?" "Relax," she laughed. "Good trending. Whitmore Living, the man rebuilding downtown." Daniel smirked slightly. "That headline sounds about right." Victoria walked up behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist. "You know what my favorite part is?" she whispered. "What?" "You didn't just build a company. You proved everyone wrong, especially her." Daniel knew exactly who she meant. Emily. Even hearing her name in his head felt distant now, like remembering an old chapter of life that had already closed. "She never understood ambition," Daniel said flatly. Victoria tilted her head. "Oh, I think she understood something," she replied softly. "She just couldn't keep up." Daniel didn't respond, but a memory flickered across his mind. Years earlier, during their 3rd year of marriage, he had once woken up late at night and found Emily sitting at the dining table, surrounded by documents. Property maps, development plans, and zoning reports. "What are you doing?" he had asked groggily. Emily had quickly closed one of the folders. "Just reading," she said. "Reading zoning reports at midnight?" She had shrugged lightly. "Cities are interesting," Daniel remembered laughing. "You worry about strange things." She had smiled faintly and said nothing. Back in the present, Daniel shook the memory away. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Leonard Hayes, his financial partner. Daniel answered casually. "Morning, Leonard." Leonard's voice was tense. "Daniel, have you checked your email yet?" Daniel frowned. "No. Why?" There was a pause on the other end. "You need to." The call ended. Daniel opened his email inbox. At the top sat a message from Crescent Holdings. Subject: Lease Structure Clarification. Daniel's brow furrowed. "Victoria," he muttered, scrolling quickly. "What is it?" she asked. "Probably paperwork." He opened the document. His eyes moved across the page slowly, then stopped. The color drained from his face. Victoria stepped closer. "Daniel?" Daniel read the line again. Primary Landholding Authority transferred to Harper Urban Developments under revised majority control. He blinked. "What?" he whispered. Victoria leaned over his shoulder. "What does that mean?" Daniel scrolled faster. His heartbeat quickened. Every major land parcel scheduled for Whitmore Living's first 3 luxury towers was listed under Harper Urban Developments. Victoria frowned. "That company name, I've heard it before." Daniel shook his head. "No, this must be some legal restructuring. The land is still secured under Crescent Holdings." He grabbed his phone and dialed Leonard again. The call connected instantly. "Leonard, tell me this email is a mistake." Leonard exhaled heavily. "It's not." Daniel's voice sharpened. "What do you mean it's not? We secured those leases months ago." "Yes," Leonard replied carefully, "through Crescent Holdings." Exactly. Leonard hesitated. That's the problem. Daniel felt a strange chill move through him. What problem? Leonard spoke slowly, choosing his words. We never owned Crescent Holdings, Daniel. We leased development rights from them. Daniel's fingers tightened around the phone. That's normal. Yes, but Crescent Holdings was just acquired last night. Daniel froze. Acquired by who? Silence hung for 2 seconds. Then Leonard answered. Harper Urban Developments. The name landed like a stone. Harper. Daniel felt the faint echo of a memory he couldn't quite place. He paced across the living room. That doesn't matter, he said quickly. They can't revoke active development contracts. Leonard's voice lowered. They can, if they control the land. Victoria's eyes widened. Wait, she said suddenly. Harper? That name? Daniel stopped pacing. Victoria looked at him slowly. Emily's last name was Harper. Daniel laughed immediately. That's coincidence. But Victoria didn't laugh. Instead, she stared at the email again. Daniel, what if it's not? Across the city, Emily Harper stood inside a quiet observation deck of a high-rise building owned by Harper Urban Developments. The same district Daniel planned to dominate stretched beneath her. Our cranes dotted the skyline. Construction permits were pending. Investors were waiting. But the ground beneath those future towers was no longer available to Daniel. Behind her, one of the attorneys approached quietly. Phase 1 completed successfully, he said. Emily nodded slightly. And Whitmore Living? Their financing structure now depends entirely on negotiations with Harper Urban Developments. Emily looked down at the streets far below. Cars moved through intersections. Pedestrians crossed sidewalks. The city continued its rhythm without knowing a financial earthquake had just begun beneath it. She remembered something her father once told her when she was young. The most powerful move in real estate, Robert Harper had said, is letting someone build their dream on land they don't control. Emily turned slightly. Prepare Phase 2. The attorney hesitated. Are you certain? Emily's expression remained calm. Yes? Back inside the penthouse, Daniel stared at the email again. Something about the name Harper Urban Developments was beginning to feel disturbingly familiar. Not from business, from somewhere else, from someone. But the connection had not fully formed yet. And when it finally did, it would destroy everything he believed he understood about his ex-wife. Daniel Whitmore had never liked uncertainty. It was the one thing he couldn't control. And for the first time since launching Whitmore Living, uncertainty was sitting heavily in his chest. He paced slowly across his office, staring out at the skyline that had looked so promising only days earlier. From the 28th floor, the downtown district spread beneath him like a map of opportunity. Glass towers, cranes, empty plots ready for luxury development. Plots he believed were his. Behind him, Leonard Hayes sat quietly at the conference table with a stack of documents. Victoria leaned against the wall near the window, arms folded. Say it again, Daniel said, his voice tight. Leonard adjusted his glasses and sighed. Crescent Holdings was never the true owner of the land parcels, he explained carefully. They were a holding intermediary. Their parent company has always been Harper Urban Developments. Daniel's jaw tightened. And now, Harper owns Crescent directly? Leonard nodded. They bought controlling shares last night. Daniel rubbed his temple. This doesn't make sense. Deals like that take months. Leonard hesitated before answering. This one didn't start last night. Daniel turned. What do you mean? Leonard slid a document across the table. This acquisition was planned over several months. Quietly. Daniel scanned the document. His eyes moved quickly across dates, signatures, and transfer agreements. Each transaction was precise, Deliberate, structured. Victoria leaned closer to look. "Who is running Harper Urban Developments?" she asked. Leonard shook his head. "That's the strange part." Daniel looked up. "What strange part?" "The company operates through a trust-controlled board. The majority shareholder has never been publicly listed." Victoria frowned. "So we don't even know who we're negotiating with?" Leonard shrugged. "Not yet." Daniel leaned back slowly in his chair. Something about that structure bothered him. It reminded him of something. A distant memory began to surface. Years earlier, during the early months of his marriage, Daniel had once attended a charity gala with Emily. He remembered standing beside her while a real estate developer spoke about urban expansion. When the man mentioned Harper Urban Developments, Emily had tilted her head slightly. Daniel had asked casually, "You know that company?" Emily had answered softly, "My father used to talk about them." At the time, Daniel assumed it was just casual interest. Now that memory returned with uncomfortable clarity, Victoria's voice cut through his thoughts. "I still think this is a coincidence," she said quickly. "Harper is a common name." Daniel nodded, but his confidence was thinner now. "Exactly." Leonard leaned forward. "There's another issue." Daniel looked at him sharply. "What now?" "The development permits for the Crown residences. They require land authorization from the majority landholder." Daniel stared at him. "And that's Harper?" "Yes." Silence settled over the room. Victoria finally broke it. "So what are you saying?" she asked slowly. Leonard looked directly at Daniel. "I'm saying Whitmore Living cannot break ground without approval from Harper Urban Developments." Daniel stood abruptly. "Then we negotiate." Leonard nodded cautiously. "That would be the logical next step." Daniel grabbed his phone. "Find out who represents them." Leonard hesitated. "They already contacted us." Daniel froze. "What?" Leonard slid another document across the table. "A meeting request?" Daniel read the letter. "Harper Urban Developments. Executive negotiation invitation location, Harper Grand Plaza. Time, Friday, 10 a.m. Daniel's stomach tightened. The Harper Grand Plaza was one of the most prestigious buildings in the city. Whoever controlled Harper Urban Developments clearly had serious power. Victoria tried to sound confident. "Good," she said. "You'll meet them, make a deal, and move forward." Daniel nodded. "Yes." But across the city, Emily Harper stood inside the Harper Grand Plaza's top-floor conference suite. The entire floor overlooked the same district Daniel planned to transform. She walked slowly past framed architectural models of developments her father had built decades earlier. Luxury hotels, residential towers, shopping complexes. Her father's quiet empire. A senior board member approached her. "The meeting request has been delivered to Mr. Whitmore," he said. Emily stopped beside the large window overlooking downtown. "And his response?" "He hasn't confirmed yet." Emily looked down at the streets below. Cars moved in slow streams through morning traffic. Somewhere in the city, Daniel Whitmore was preparing to negotiate with the company that controlled his future. She remembered a moment from college years ago. Victoria Lane had once cornered her at a campus event. "You know Daniel is wasting his time with you," Victoria had said with a smug smile. "Men like him need women who push them." Emily had simply looked at her calmly. "If he needs pushing," she replied quietly, "he probably isn't very strong." Victoria had laughed then. Emily hadn't. Now, years later, the same rival had married the man who believed he had escaped her. Emily turned back toward the board members. "Prepare the contracts," she said. One of the attorneys asked carefully, "Are we revealing your identity during negotiations?" Emily paused for a moment. A faint smile appeared on her face. "No?" The attorney looked surprised. You want the negotiations to proceed normally? Yes. Emily's voice remained steady. Let him believe he's dealing with strangers. Across the city, Daniel Whitmore finally pressed confirm on the meeting request. He had no idea that in 3 days he would walk into a negotiation with the one person he believed he had left behind forever. His ex-wife, the wife he left penniless, the woman who quietly controlled the land beneath his empire. Daniel Whitmore had negotiated deals his entire career, but something about this meeting felt different. The Harper Grand Plaza towered above the downtown district like a monument to quiet power. Its glass exterior reflected the morning sun, and the polished marble entrance looked less like an office building and more like a fortress for billion-dollar decisions. Daniel adjusted his suit as he stepped out of the car. Victoria stood beside him, her expression carefully confident. "You're going to walk in there, shake a few hands, and solve this," she said. Daniel nodded. "That's the plan." But as he entered the building lobby, something about the atmosphere unsettled him. The staff greeted him immediately. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore," the receptionist said with a professional smile. Daniel paused. "You were expecting me?" "Yes, sir. The executive floor is prepared." Victoria glanced at him. "Of course they were expecting you," she whispered. "It's a scheduled meeting." Daniel nodded slowly, but the precision of it still felt strange. They stepped into a private elevator reserved for executive meetings. As the elevator rose silently toward the top floor, Daniel looked out at the skyline through the glass wall. The same skyline he planned to reshape. The same skyline Emily had once studied quietly while sitting beside him during long evenings. A memory surfaced again. One night years ago, while reviewing a potential property deal, Daniel had laughed at the price of a certain parcel downtown. "Who would pay that much for land that small?" he had said. Emily had glanced at the document and replied softly, "Someone who understands what the city will look like in 10 years. Daniel had shrugged. "Sounds expensive." Emily had smiled faintly. "Only if you're late." The elevator doors opened. A tall executive assistant greeted them. "Mr. Whitmore, Miss Lane, welcome. Please follow me." They walked down a long corridor lined with large photographs of city developments. Victoria slowed slightly. "Daniel," she whispered, "these buildings, I recognize some of them." Daniel nodded. "Major developments from the last 20 years. The assistant opened the conference room doors. Inside, several board members sat around a long glass table. Attorneys, financial strategists, senior executives. The atmosphere was calm but powerful. Daniel stepped forward confidently. "Daniel Whitmore," he introduced himself, extending his hand to the nearest board member. The man shook it politely. "We know who you are." Daniel sat down, Victoria beside him. The meeting began. A senior attorney opened the discussion. "Mr. Whitmore, as you're aware, on Harper Urban Developments now holds majority control of the Crescent land structures involved in your Crown Residences project." Daniel leaned forward. "Yes, which is why we're here. I believe we can reach a mutually beneficial arrangement." The board members exchanged brief glances. Daniel continued confidently. "My company has already secured investor commitments and development permits. The Crown Residences will bring enormous value to the district." One of the board members asked calmly, "And what exactly are you proposing?" Daniel placed a proposal folder on the table. "A partnership?" Victoria smiled slightly. Daniel continued. "Whitmore Living leads construction and development. Harper Urban Developments receives a significant revenue share." The room fell quiet as the executives reviewed the documents. Several minutes passed. And finally, the senior attorney closed the folder. "Your proposal is ambitious." Daniel leaned back slightly. "Ambition builds cities." But the attorney shook his head slowly. "Mr. Whitmore, the situation is simpler than you think." Daniel frowned. "How so?" The attorney slid a document across the table. Daniel looked down. It was a financial structure analysis. Whitmore Living's entire project depended on Harper-controlled land. Without Harper approval, construction could not begin. Without construction, investors could withdraw funding. Without funding, Whitmore Living collapsed. Daniel looked up. "So what exactly are you saying?" One of the board members answered calmly. "We're saying Harper Urban Developments doesn't need a partnership." Victoria's confident expression began to fade. Daniel's voice hardened. "Then why request this meeting?" The board members exchanged another glance. The senior attorney finally spoke. "Because the majority shareholder wanted to meet you." Daniel blinked. "The majority shareholder?" "Yes." Daniel looked around the room. "Where are they?" The attorney checked his watch. "She should be here any moment." Victoria frowned. "She?" But before anyone could say anything else, the conference room doors opened. Soft footsteps echoed across the polished floor. Daniel turned toward the entrance and froze. Emily Harper stepped inside. She wore a tailored white suit, her posture calm and composed. The room immediately stood in quiet respect. Not for Daniel, for her. Victoria's face drained of color. Daniel's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. Emily walked slowly to the head of the table, the seat reserved for the majority shareholder. She placed a thin folder on the table and looked directly at Daniel. For a moment, no one spoke. Then she said quietly, "Hello, Daniel?" The same voice, the same calm tone. But now the entire room waited for her words. Daniel's throat tightened. Emily tilted her head slightly. "Yes?" Victoria whispered in disbelief. This isn't possible." Emily opened the folder and slid a document across the table. Daniel stared at it. Harper Urban Developments, majority ownership declaration signed. Emily Harper. Daniel looked up slowly. "You're Harper?" Emily's expression remained calm. "I always was." The room fell silent again. Daniel felt the ground beneath his plans collapse in real time. Every building, every investment, every dream, built on land owned by the woman he left with a single suitcase. Emily looked at him quietly. "You once said I slowed you down." Daniel couldn't speak. She continued calmly. "But it turns out." Her fingers tapped the document lightly. "You were standing on my land the entire time." For several seconds after Emily spoke, Daniel Whitmore could not move. The room around him seemed to shrink, the long conference table suddenly feeling like a courtroom where he had unknowingly placed himself on trial. Emily Harper stood calmly at the head of the table, her white suit sharp and immaculate, her posture steady. The board members remained silent, waiting for her direction. Even the attorneys had stopped turning pages. Victoria Lane's voice broke the silence first. This is a joke," she said, forcing out a shaky laugh. "Daniel, tell me this is some kind of corporate prank." No one laughed. Emily looked at Victoria briefly, not with hostility, but with quiet recognition. "Hello, Victoria," she said softly. Victoria's eyes widened. "You knew?" Emily's gaze returned to Daniel. "Of course I knew." The memory flashed across Victoria's mind instantly. College corridors, whispered competitions, the rivalry that had never quite ended. But now the stage was different. This wasn't campus. This was a boardroom, and Emily was the most powerful person inside it. Daniel finally found his voice. "You hid this," he said hoarsely. Emily didn't argue. "Yes." His fists tightened. "You let me believe you had nothing." Emily's expression remained composed. "You didn't ask." The answer struck harder than any accusation. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, trying to regain control. "This changes nothing," he said quickly. "You own the land? Fine. But Whitmore Living has investors, financing, contracts." Emily lifted one finger slightly. The senior attorney slid another document toward Daniel. He read the title, Investor Withdrawal Contingency Clause. His stomach sank. Without land authorization, Whitmore Living's investors had legal grounds to pull their funding. Emily spoke gently. "Your investors were very careful with their contracts." Daniel's breathing grew uneven. "You planned this." Emily didn't respond immediately. Instead, her mind drifted briefly to a quiet afternoon years earlier. She had been 21, sitting with her father on a rooftop overlooking the same city skyline. Robert Harper had once asked her a strange question. "If someone betrays you, what do you do?" Emily had thought for a moment. "You fight them." Her father had shaken his head. "No, fighting wastes energy." "Then what?" "You let them walk exactly where they want to go." He pointed toward the city. "And make sure the ground they walk on belongs to you." Back in the present, Emily looked at Daniel again. I didn't plan revenge," she said calmly. "I planned protection." Daniel laughed bitterly. "Protection? You just destroyed my company?" Emily shook her head slowly. "No." She pushed another document across the table. Daniel read it. His eyes widened. Operational employment contract. Whitmore Living Division. Victoria leaned over his shoulder. "What is that?" Daniel's voice barely came out. "It's a management contract." Emily spoke. "Whitmore Living will continue operating." Daniel looked up. "But not under your ownership." The room felt colder. Emily continued calmly. "Harper Urban Developments has acquired majority control of Whitmore Living's investor shares." Victoria gasped. "You bought his company?" Emily nodded slightly. Daniel stared at her in disbelief. So what? You're bankrupting me?" Emily's voice softened. "No." She pointed gently to the contract. "You're still valuable, Daniel." Daniel read the final line. "Position, Operations Director, Whitmore Living, Harper Division, salary. Fixed, limited, no ownership, no executive control." Victoria stepped back as if burned. "You're turning him into an employee?" Emily didn't look at her. "I'm giving him stability." Daniel's face flushed with humiliation. "You expect me to work for you?" Emily's eyes held his calmly. "You built a good operational team." Her words carried no cruelty, only truth. Daniel stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. "You ruined everything." Emily tilted her head slightly. "No?" She gestured toward the skyline outside the glass wall. I just made sure the buildings are finished." Victoria looked between them in disbelief. "So this is your revenge?" Emily finally turned to her fully. "This isn't revenge," Victoria scoffed. "Then what is it?" Emily paused. For a moment, the quiet woman Daniel once underestimated returned to her eyes. Closure. The word landed heavier than anger. Daniel suddenly realized something even worse than financial loss. Emily had not destroyed him. She had simply removed him from power. And that was far more permanent, because now every building he helped construct, every contract he signed, every decision he made, would ultimately belong to her. Months later, the city newspapers celebrated the successful launch of the Crown Residences. But the headlines were different. Harper Urban Developments expands downtown skyline. Whitmore Living had become a division under Harper. Daniel Whitmore remained operations director. Victoria Lane, who once flaunted her victory over Emily, quietly disappeared from social events within the year. Their marriage began to fracture under the pressure of lost status, lost influence, and the uncomfortable truth that Victoria had married a man she believed was powerful. Now he worked for his ex-wife. Meanwhile, Emily Harper continued expanding the empire her father had left behind. She never publicly exposed Daniel. She never mocked him. She never told the press the truth. She simply allowed the city to whisper the story quietly. Because sometimes the most devastating payback isn't destruction. It's survival. It's success. It's watching someone realize, and slowly and painfully, that the woman they left penniless was the one who owned the ground beneath their dreams all along. And every time Daniel Whitmore looked up at the skyline he helped build, he saw the name on every tower: Harper, the wife he left penniless, the real estate mogul worth $800 million, the woman whose ultimate payback didn't just hurt them. It changed their lives forever.